Robert Miller arrived home 3 hours early that Friday in October, and he heard something that made him stop dead in the hallway. It was the sound of knitting needles, click-clacking softly, but no one in that house knew how to knit. Robert was the CEO of one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the United States. The irony of it all. His company produced medications for respiratory illnesses, and his 9-year-old son, Matthew, had cystic fibrosis since he was 2 years old. If this story is resonating with you in any way, if you feel like the world sometimes turns its back on you, please stay, because what you are about to hear will change the way you see the people around you. The sound was coming from Matthew's room. Robert walked slowly, almost holding his breath. The hardwood floor creaked under his $2,000 Italian shoes, but he didn't hear the creak. He only heard the click, click, click of something metallic, or maybe wood, gently colliding over and over again. Matthew had been diagnosed when he was barely walking. Cystic fibrosis. 2 words that shattered the heart of Robert and his wife, Ellen, who died in a car accident when Matthew was 4 years old. Since then, Robert had been alone with his son, alone with his guilt, alone with his money that couldn't buy a cure. Matthew's illness was like a silent thief. It stole his air, his energy, his sleep, but what it stole most was warmth. Matthew's body didn't regulate temperature well. He sweated excessively during the day, and at night, the chills would wake him up shivering like a leaf in a storm. Robert had bought the best blankets in the world. Thermal blankets imported from Germany, goose-down comforters from Iceland, blankets with NASA technology. None of them worked. Matthew would sweat in them for 2 hours, then throw them off, and at 3 in the morning he'd wake up shivering, crying, calling for a father who often wasn't there because he was working until midnight. That was the truth that Robert didn't want to admit. He worked so much because he couldn't bear to see his son suffer. He worked so much because every minute in the office was a minute he didn't have to face the reality that all his money was useless. Robert remembered the nights, those endless nights when Matthew's cries pierced the walls of the Miller mansion like a knife. Those nights when he'd rush to his son's room and find him shivering under 3 blankets, with purple lips and ice-cold skin. Those nights when he'd hug him, trying to warm him with his own body, but it was never enough. The doctors had explained it 1,000 times. Cystic fibrosis affects thermal regulation. Matthew's body produced a thick mucus that clogged his lungs and digestive system, but it also affected his sweat glands. He sweated salt excessively during the day, which dehydrated him, and at night, without that regulatory mechanism working properly, his temperature plummeted. It was a cruel cycle. Sweat during the day, shiver during the night, and repeat. Every day, every night, for 7 years. Robert had tried everything. He had bought special heaters for Matthew's room. He had installed a smart climate control system that maintained the exact temperature. He had brought specialists from Europe and the United States for consultations that cost more than the annual salary of his employees. Nothing worked. The problem wasn't the temperature of the room, the problem was Matthew's body. And that couldn't be fixed with money. And then Connie arrived. Connie Ramirez was 48 years old when she knocked on the door of the Miller mansion 8 months ago. She came recommended by a domestic employment agency. Her resume was simple. She had worked in 4 houses before. She knew how to cook, clean, iron, nothing extraordinary. Robert barely looked at her during the interview. He asked her 3 questions, told her the salary, and pointed out where the servants' quarters were. To him, Connie was just another employee, number 12 in 5 years. None of them lasted. None of them could stand the nights of screams when Matthew woke up shivering. None of them wanted to clean up the vomit that Matthew's chronic cough sometimes produced. But the sound Robert heard that Friday wasn't from the television. It was real. Someone in his house was knitting. He stopped in front of Matthew's door. It was ajar. A soft light spilled through the crack, the light of the sunset filtered by the curtains. And a voice, too, a female voice humming a song that Robert didn't recognize. He didn't open the door. Not yet. He stayed there, paralyzed, listening. Strange things had happened in recent months. Things that Robert had noticed but had attributed to the new medications or coincidence. Matthew no longer woke up screaming at 3 in the morning. Matthew smiled more. Matthew had drawn something last week, something he hadn't done in 2 years since the doctor said his condition had worsened. And there was something else. Something Robert had found accidentally. 2 weeks ago, looking for a phone charger in the kitchen, he opened a drawer that he never opened. Inside, there was a clear plastic bag. Inside the bag were balls of yarn, cream-colored yarn, soft as clouds, and a tag in a language he didn't recognize. Later, he searched on the internet. It was hypoallergenic merino wool from New Zealand, the most expensive and softest wool in the world. The wool that doesn't irritate sensitive skin. The perfect wool for someone with cystic fibrosis. Robert stared at that bag for 5 minutes. Then he closed it and left it where it was. He didn't ask anyone. He didn't want to know. Maybe because he already suspected something that his mind didn't want to accept. That wool cost $87 a bag. Connie earned $1,800 a week. That bag represented almost half of her weekly salary. And there were 6 bags in that drawer. If this story is already stirring something in your heart, if you already feel that tears want to come out, don't stop them, because what's coming is even stronger. And if this story is helping you, please consider supporting this channel. Your support allows stories like this to reach more people who need to hear them. Robert remembered something else. 3 months ago, Matthew had said something strange during breakfast. "Dad, I want to touch the sky." Robert thought it was a line from some cartoon. He ruffled his hair and went to work. He didn't ask him why he said it. He didn't have time. Now, standing in front of that door, listening to the needles knitting and a voice humming, Robert began to connect the dots. Connie wasn't just cleaning the house. Connie was doing something more. The click, click, click of the needles stopped. Robert held his breath. He heard movement inside the room, soft footsteps, the creak of a mattress, and then Connie's voice, as soft as the wool she knitted with. "It's almost ready, my little man. You can almost touch the stars." Robert felt the floor disappear beneath his feet. Stars, heaven. Matthew had said he wanted to touch the sky, and Connie was knitting something with stars. But how did she know? How did Connie know what Matthew wanted? Robert didn't know. The father didn't know. And a housekeeper who'd been in the house for 8 months did? He took a step back. He didn't want to see. Not yet. He wasn't ready to face what was on the other side of that door, because he knew what he saw would change everything. He knew what he saw would make him feel like the worst father in the world, or the luckiest man in the world, or both. He went to his study, closed the door, poured himself a whiskey, and stared out the window until it got dark. That night, for the first time in 4 years, Matthew didn't wake up trembling at 3 in the morning. Robert did wake up. He woke up at 3 minutes past 3, out of habit. His body was programmed to hear his son's cries, but there were no cries, just silence. A silence that scared him more than any scream. He got up, walked down the hall, opened Matthew's bedroom door. Moonlight streamed through the window, bathing the bed in a silvery glow. And there was Matthew, asleep, peaceful, with a smile on his lips, covered up to his chest with something Robert had never seen before. It was a blanket, a hand-knitted blanket, cream-colored with blue star patterns, 5 pointed stars scattered all over the fabric like a night sky. The blanket looked heavy, but not too heavy. It looked soft, incredibly soft, and Matthew was clutching it as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Robert approached, touched the blanket. It was warm, but not hot, heavy, but not overwhelming, perfect, absolutely perfect for a child whose body couldn't regulate its own temperature. In the lower corner of the blanket, embroidered with dark blue thread, were two letters, C and M, Connie and Matthew. Robert stood there next to his son's bed for 20 minutes. He didn't move. He didn't make a sound. He just watched his son sleep peacefully for the first time in years, and tears started to fall down his cheeks without him being able to stop them. The next morning, Robert didn't go to work. He stayed home. He observed. Connie arrived at 6 in the morning, as always, but she didn't start cleaning. First, she went to Matthew's room. Robert followed her silently, keeping his distance. He saw her enter the room. He saw her sit by the bed. He saw her take a small notebook out of her apron pocket, and he saw her write something down. Later, when Connie was in the kitchen, Robert went into Matthew's room and looked for that notebook. He found it under his son's pillow. It was a spiral notebook with a worn cover. On the first page it said, Matthew's temperatures. The next 50 pages were filled with numbers, dates, times, temperatures. 6 in the morning, 97.2 degrees. 8 in the morning, 98.2 degrees. 10 in the morning, 98.8 degrees. Connie had been measuring Matthew's temperature every 2 hours for 2 months. Robert flipped through the pages with trembling hands. There were hand-drawn charts, patterns, margin notes, sweats, more after eating. Chills start when it drops below 96.4. Critical point is at 3 in the morning. Connie had studied his son like he was a science project. She had understood his body better than any doctor. She had found the patterns that no one else had looked for. And then, on the last written page, there was a different note. Ideal blanket weight for Matthew, 5 pounds, heavy enough to provide a sense of security without making him sweat. Hypoallergenic merino wool to avoid irritation, open weave in some areas for ventilation, closed weave on the chest where he feels the coldest. Robert closed the notebook, put it back where he found it, and left the room with a broken heart. Not broken from sadness, broken from shame. He had hired the best pediatricians, the best pulmonologists, the best cystic fibrosis specialists in the United States. He had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on consultations, on medications, on experimental treatments, and none of them, absolutely none of them, had thought to measure Matthew's temperature every 2 hours to understand his patterns. None of them had thought to knit a blanket with specific weight and strategic ventilation. None of them had thought to ask Matthew what he dreamed, what he wanted, what he needed to feel safe. Connie did. Connie, with her minimum wage and her artisan hands, had achieved what millions of dollars couldn't. But the question that tormented Robert was another one. Why? Why would a housekeeper dedicate months of work and half of her salary to knitting a blanket for her boss's son? Why would she wake up an hour earlier every day to knit before she started cleaning? Why would she study the body of a sick child with the dedication of a scientist and the love of a mother? Robert needed to know, but he didn't dare to ask. Another week passed. Robert kept observing, kept arriving early, kept listening to the click, click, click of the knitting needles every morning at 6, and kept seeing Matthew improve. The boy who used to spend all his time in bed now went down to the garden. The boy who used to cough all night now slept 8 hours straight. The boy who used to have purple circles under his eyes now had color in his cheeks. The doctors were confused. At the last consultation, the pulmonologist told Robert something that left him speechless. "I don't understand what's happening, Mr. Miller. Matthew's numbers have improved significantly. His nocturnal hypothermia episodes have been reduced by 73%. His sleep quality has increased by 60%. We haven't changed any medication. There's no medical explanation." Robert didn't say anything. He didn't mention the blanket. He didn't mention Connie. He didn't know why he was silent. Maybe because he was afraid that if he said it out loud, the miracle would disappear, or maybe because he was afraid to face the truth that a housekeeper had saved his son while he hid in the office, the truth that the free love of a stranger had done more than all his money. The truth that he had been so blinded by his pain that he didn't see what was happening under his own roof. 3 days later, Robert discovered something that completely deprived him of sleep. It was Sunday. Connie had the day off, but she arrived at 7 in the morning anyway. Robert saw her from the window of his study. He saw her enter through the service door with a bag in her hand, a cloth bag with something inside. Curiosity got the better of him. He waited for Connie to go up to Matthew's room and then went down to the kitchen. He found the bag on the table. Inside there was more wool, this time dark blue. The same blue as the stars on Matthew's blanket. And there was something else, a receipt. The receipt was from a fabric store downtown. It was crumpled, as if someone had kept it in their pocket many times. Robert read it with his heart racing. Navy blue hypoallergenic merino wool, $35. Bamboo needles, size 8, $12. Dark blue embroidery thread, 3. The date on the receipt was from 6 months ago. Connie had been planning this since almost the beginning. From the first weeks of work, she had bought the materials with her own money, month after month, sacrificing who knows how many things, to knit a blanket for the son of a man who barely looked at her. Robert sat down on a kitchen chair. He stared at the receipt for a long time, and he started doing the math. 6 bags of cream wool at $70 each, 4 bags of blue wool at $35 each, needles, threads, other materials, approximate total, $500. Connie earned $550 a month. She had spent almost a full month's salary on materials to knit a blanket for Matthew, an employee who lived in a small room, an 8x8 room in the service quarters, an employee who had no known family, an employee who never asked for anything, who never complained, who did her job in silence and without expecting recognition. That employee had invested everything she had in someone else's child. Robert didn't understand. He couldn't understand. In his world, people did things for money, for power, for recognition. Nobody did something this big for nothing, unless there was a reason, and there was. Robert discovered it that same afternoon, in the most unexpected way. Matthew was in the garden, sitting on a bench under the magnolia tree. Connie was beside him, knitting something small, maybe a practice square. Robert watched them from the second-floor window, as he had done so many times in the last few weeks, and then he heard Matthew ask her a question. "Connie, why do you always smell like lavender?" The boy's voice came clearly through the open window. Robert moved a little closer, holding his breath. Connie stopped knitting. She looked at Matthew with a sad smile that Robert had never seen before. "Because my son also loved lavender," she said. Matthew tilted his head. "You have a son?" "Had," corrected Connie. "His name was Carlos. He was 6 years old when God took him." Robert felt the world stop. Connie continued talking, in the soft, slow voice of someone who has told that story many times in their mind, but rarely out loud. "Carlos was born with lung problems. The doctor said he wouldn't live more than a year, but he lived 6. 6 years of struggle, 6 years of sleepless nights, 6 years of watching him shiver with cold because his little body couldn't warm itself." Matthew didn't say anything. He just listened with wide eyes. "I used to knit him blankets," Connie continued. "I knitted and knitted, but I never found the right formula. They were always too hot or too cold, and one January night, Carlos had a crisis. His temperature dropped too low and I couldn't warm him up in time." Connie stopped. Robert saw her wipe away a tear with the back of her hand. "He died in my arms," she said, shivering, cold. "And I couldn't do anything to save him." The silence that followed was so dense that Robert could feel it pressing on his chest. And then Matthew did something that Robert would never forget. The 9-year-old boy with cystic fibrosis got up from the bench. He walked towards Connie and he hugged her. He didn't hug her like a child hugs an employee. He hugged her like a son hugs a mother, tightly, with love. with the certainty that that person would protect him from anything. "You're not going to let me be cold," Matthew said. "Are you, Connie?" Connie cried. She cried like Robert had never seen her cry. She cried with silent sobs that shook her whole body. And she hugged Matthew as if the boy was the only thing keeping her standing. "Never, my child. You'll never be cold while I live." The afternoon sun lit up the scene as if it were a painting. The magnolia tree cast soft shadows over the two. The wind moved the leaves with a quiet whisper, and Robert, from the window, saw something he had never seen in his house. He saw love. Not the love that is bought with gifts, not the love that is shown with expensive trips, not the love that is measured in dollars and cents. He saw the love that is given without expecting anything, the love that hurts because it's real, the love that transforms because it comes from the soul. And that love wasn't coming from him. It was coming from a woman who cleaned his floors. Robert walked away from the window. He walked to his study. He closed the door, and for the first time in many years, the CEO of a multi-million-dollar pharmaceutical company sat on the floor, covered his face with his hands, and cried like a child. Now he understood. Connie wasn't knitting a blanket for Matthew. She was knitting the blanket she could never finish for Carlos. She was saving Matthew because she couldn't save her own son. She was giving the love that had been trapped in her chest for 15 years, looking for a way out, looking for a purpose. And she had found it in a child who wasn't hers, in a child who shivered with cold like Carlos, in a child who needed exactly what she could give. But there was something more, something that Robert understood in that moment with devastating clarity. Connie hadn't failed Carlos because of a lack of love. She had failed because she didn't know enough. She didn't have the resources. She didn't have the knowledge. But she had learned. In the 15 years since her son's death, she had learned everything about thermoregulation, about hypoallergenic wools, about specific blanket weights. She had studied without having a patient. She had practiced without having a purpose, until she came to the Miller mansion and saw Matthew, and all that knowledge, all that preparation, all that love accumulated for 15 years, finally had a destination. What would you do in Robert's place? What would you do if you discovered that an employee was giving everything she had to save your son? What would you do if you knew she was doing this not for money, not for recognition, but because her broken heart needed to heal? If you haven't felt anything yet, check your pulse, because what's coming is the moment that changed everything. That night, Robert went down to the kitchen at 11 o'clock. He couldn't sleep, not after what he'd overheard, and he found Connie there, sitting in a kitchen chair, knitting by the light of a small lamp, knitting something blue. She saw him and immediately stood up, hiding the knitting behind her back like a child caught doing something forbidden. "Mr. Miller, I apologize. I was just heading to bed. Robert raised his hand to stop her. "I know about Matthew," he said. Connie paled. Her hands began to tremble. The ball of blue yarn fell to the floor and rolled to Robert's feet. "Sir, I can explain." "You don't have to explain anything," Robert interrupted. "I just want to tell you something." Connie looked at him, her eyes filled with fear. Fear of being fired. Fear of losing the only place she'd found purpose in 15 years. Fear of Matthew being taken away from her, like Carlitos had been, but Robert didn't say what she expected. "Thank you," he said, his voice breaking, tears in his eyes, with the humility of a man who finally understood how little he knew about love. Connie didn't respond. She just stood there, trembling, her eyes filled with tears she didn't dare let fall. Robert picked up the ball of yarn from the floor. He looked at it for a moment, and then he gave it back to Connie. "Finish the blanket," he said. "Matthew needs it, and I think you do too." And then he did something he had never done with any employee in his entire life. He hugged her. He hugged her, like you hug someone who has saved your life, like you hug someone who has done the impossible without expecting anything in return, like you hug someone who is no longer just an employee, but something more. Something that Robert had no name to describe. Connie cried on his shoulder for 5 minutes, and Robert let her cry, because he understood that those tears weren't just for Matthew. They were for Carlitos. They were for 15 years of guilt. They were for a permission that Connie had never given herself. The permission to love another child without feeling like she was betraying her dead son. When they separated, Connie looked at him, her eyes red, but with a peace that Robert had never seen before. "You're not angry, sir?" she asked. Robert shook his head. "I'm ashamed," he said. "Ashamed that an employee has to teach me how to love my own son." Connie smiled, a small, sad, but genuine smile. "Love can't be taught, sir," she said. "It's only given, and you have a lot to give. You just had it stored in the wrong place." Robert didn't know how to respond to that, so he said nothing. He just nodded, turned around, and went up to his room. But he didn't go to sleep. He went to Matthew's room. He opened the door slowly. He looked at his son asleep under the star blanket, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel guilt. He didn't feel fear. He didn't feel the urge to flee to the office to escape reality. He only felt love. He sat in the chair next to the bed, the same chair where Connie sat every morning at 6, and he stayed there all night, watching his son sleep, listening to his peaceful breathing, feeling the warmth of the blanket woven with love. When the sun began to rise, Robert got up, kissed Matthew's forehead, and left the room with a decision made. He was going to change, not out of obligation, not out of guilt, but because he had finally understood something that Connie knew from the beginning. Love isn't bought with money. Love is woven stitch by stitch, hour by hour, day by day, with patience, with dedication, with the willingness to give, without expecting anything in return. And Robert was ready to start weaving, but fate had other plans. 3 weeks after that night in the kitchen, something changed, something that no one saw coming. Matthew woke up one morning with a fever. It wasn't the common fever of a cold. It was a fever of 103, 6 degrees Fahrenheit. That wouldn't go down with anything. A fever that in a child with cystic fibrosis could mean a serious lung infection. Robert called the best doctors, the best specialists. They came to the Miller mansion in less than 2 hours. They ran tests, took samples, connected machines. The diagnosis came that same night. Pseudomonas aeruginosa, a bacteria that attacks the lungs of patients with cystic fibrosis. A bacteria that can be fatal if not treated in time. Robert heard the pulmonologist's words as if they were coming from far away. Immediate hospitalization, intravenous antibiotics, constant monitoring, possible surgery if the infection spreads. Matthew was rushed to the hospital that night. Robert went with him. He didn't leave his side for a second, but when they arrived at the hospital, when the nurses started connecting the wires and tubes to Matthew's small body, the boy did something that broke Robert's heart. He cried, but he didn't cry out of fear of the needles. He didn't cry because of the pain. He cried for something else. "My blanket," he said in a weak voice. "I want my star blanket. I can't sleep without it." Robert looked at him, uncomprehending. In the midst of all the chaos, in the midst of the fear and urgency, his 9-year-old son only wanted a blanket. "We didn't bring it," said Robert, "but I can have them bring it." "No," said Matthew. "Connie has to bring it. She knows how to put it on. She knows where I like it to be tight and where I like it to be loose. No one else knows." Robert felt something crumble inside him. His son, the son he had cared for 9 years, the son for whom he had paid millions in treatments, preferred a housekeeper in this moment of crisis, preferred Connie's hands over his own, and Robert couldn't blame him, because it was true. Connie knew Matthew in a way that he had never taken the time to know him. He made the call. At 11 o'clock that night, Connie arrived at the hospital with the star blanket in her arms. She entered the room as if it were her own home, without fear, without hesitation. She went straight to Matthew's bed. She removed the hospital sheets. She put on the star blanket, adjusting each corner with millimeter precision, loosening the part at the feet because Matthew hated feeling trapped, tightening the part at the chest because that's where he felt the coldest. And then she sat next to the bed, took Matthew's hand, and began to sing. It was a song in Spanish that Robert didn't recognize, a lullaby, perhaps, a song that Connie probably sang to Carlitos 15 years ago, a song tucked away in her memory, waiting for another child to sing to. Matthew closed his eyes. His breathing calmed. The fever didn't break, but the boy stopped trembling. He stopped crying. He stopped being afraid. Connie's song filled the sterile hospital room like incense, softening the harsh edges of the machines, warming the chill of the white walls, transforming that place of sickness into a haven of peace. Nurses passing in the hallway stopped to listen. Some smiled, others wiped away discreet tears. None interrupted, because they all recognized what was happening. They had all seen so much in their years of work, but few had seen anything like this. A woman who wasn't a mother, who wasn't a nurse, who wasn't anything official, giving more love in one night than many parents give in a lifetime. Robert watched from a chair in the corner of the room. He watched his son at peace. He watched Connie caring for him with a dedication he had never been able to give. And he understood, finally, what it meant to be a father. It wasn't paying hospital bills. It wasn't hiring specialists. It wasn't buying the best blankets in the world. It was being there, present, with hands ready to do whatever was necessary. With a heart open to give, without expecting anything in return. Like Connie. That night, Robert didn't sleep. He stayed in the chair, watching Matthew sleep under the star blanket, listening to Connie hum softly whenever the boy stirred. And he made a decision. The next morning, when the doctor came in to check on Matthew, Robert stopped him at the door. "I need to speak with you," he said, "about the woman in there." The doctor looked toward the room. He saw Connie sitting next to the bed, Matthew's hand in hers. "Is she a nurse?" the doctor asked. "No," said Robert. "She's our housekeeper." The doctor frowned, confused. "Then why is she in there? Visiting hours are over for the night." Robert smiled, a tired but genuine smile. "Because my son needs her more than he needs me. And because she takes better care of him than any nurse I've ever known." The doctor didn't know how to respond. Robert continued. "I want her included on Matthew's care team, officially. I want her to have access to his room 24 hours a day. I want her to be able to make decisions about his comfort when I'm not here." "That's highly irregular," the doctor said. Robert looked him in the eye. "Doctor, you've been treating my son for 7 years. You've seen him get worse year after year. You've seen how no medicine, no therapy, no technology could give him a peaceful night's sleep. And now look at him. Look at how he's sleeping. Look at his face. When was the last time you saw him this calm?" The doctor glanced into the room. He saw Matthew asleep, with a faint smile on his lips, hugging the star blanket like a treasure. "Never," admitted the doctor. "I've never seen him like this." "That woman," said Robert, pointing to Connie, "achieved in 8 months what you and your team couldn't achieve in 7 years. And she did it with bamboo needles and wool from New Zealand, so forgive me if I find her more capable than any specialist who has charged me a fortune." The doctor didn't argue. He just nodded and left the room. From that day on, Connie had unlimited access to the hospital. The nurses looked at her with curiosity at first, but soon they began to respect her. They saw how Matthew calmed down when she entered. They saw how his fever dropped faster when she put the star blanket on him. They saw how the boy smiled when she told him stories of her village back home. One of the nurses, an older woman named Lucy, approached Connie on the third day. "What is it about that blanket?" she asked. "And I've seen a lot in 30 years of nursing, but I've never seen a patient respond like this to a piece of cloth." Connie smiled. "It's not the blanket," she said. "It's what's woven into it." Lucy frowned. What do you mean?" Connie took a corner of the blanket and showed it to Lucy. "You see these stitches? Each one is a prayer. Each row is an hour I spent thinking about how to keep Matthew from being cold. Each star is a wish that this boy lives a long and happy life." Lucy looked at the blanket with different eyes. "How long did it take you to make it?" 8 months, said Connie. 2 hours every morning before I started cleaning. More time at night when I couldn't sleep. And you paid for it with your own money." Connie nodded. Lucy didn't say anything else. She just stood there looking at the blanket, touching it with soft fingers, as if she could feel the prayers woven into each stitch. That night, Lucy told the other nurses Connie's story, and the next day, something extraordinary happened. The nurses started bringing things. One brought a skein of blue yarn that she had stored in her house. Another brought knitting needles that had belonged to her grandmother. Another brought embroidery floss in colors that matched the star blanket. And they asked Connie to teach them how to knit. "We want to make blankets for the other children," said Lucy. "The other children on the pulmonary ward, the ones who are also cold at night, the ones who also need something to make them feel safe." Connie looked at them with watery eyes. "But I'm not a teacher," she said. "I'm just a housekeeper who learned to knit from her grandmother." Lucy took her hands in her own. "You're much more than that," she said. "You're someone who knows how to give love in a way that we, with all our degrees and uniforms, forgot a long time ago." Connie accepted that week, while Matthew slowly recovered from the infection. Connie taught 6 nurses how to knit blankets. She taught them how to choose the right yarn. She taught them how to calculate the ideal weight. She taught them how to make open stitches for ventilation and closed stitches for warmth. But above all, she taught them something that wasn't in any nursing manual. She taught them to knit with love, to think about the patient while they were knitting, to pray for their health with each stitch, to put into the yarn everything they couldn't express with words. And it worked. The nurses began to notice changes. The children who received the hand-knitted blankets slept better, cried less, recovered faster. It wasn't magic. It wasn't medicine. It was something simpler and deeper. It was the warmth of human love woven into each stitch. It was good intention turned into wool. It was proof that science doesn't explain everything, but the heart feels everything. A 6-year-old boy with severe asthma stopped waking up frightened when they put his knitted blanket on him. A 4-year-old girl with pneumonia stopped crying at night. A 15-year-old with cystic fibrosis like Matthew told his mother something that brought tears to her eyes. "Mom, this blanket feels like a hug that never ends." And that was exactly what Connie wanted. That was exactly what she had learned in 15 years of grieving. That physical hugs end, but hugs woven in wool remain. 2 weeks later, when Matthew was finally discharged, the pulmonology floor of the hospital had 12 new blankets, 12 blankets hand-knitted by nurses who had remembered why they chose that profession. 12 blankets that now covered 12 children who had previously shivered from the cold at night. Robert paid for all the wool. He paid for more needles. He paid for a knitting workshop that Connie gave to the nurses on other floors. But he didn't do it out of charity. He didn't do it to improve his image. He did it because he finally understood. Money is useless if it isn't used to multiply love. And Connie had found a way to multiply love with wool and bamboo needles. A way that none of his millions had been able to find. Some people are going to pause this video here. They're going to say it's too much, that they can't process so many emotions, and that's okay. Breathe, take a moment. But I promise you, what's coming is worth it, because I haven't even told you what happened when Matthew came home. The day Matthew left the hospital, Robert organized a small welcome home, balloons at the entrance, a chocolate cake, Matthew's favorite, soft music, everything a father with millions could buy. But Matthew didn't look at the balloons. He didn't look at the cake. He didn't listen to the music. He looked at Connie, and he ran to her. He hugged her with all the strength his weakened little body could muster. He hugged her like he hadn't hugged anyone in a long time. And he said something that changed the lives of everyone in that house forever. "Thank you for not letting me be cold, Mom Connie. Mom Connie." Robert heard those words and felt like the world stopped. His son, the son who had lost his mother 5 years ago, had just called the housekeeper Mom, but he didn't feel jealous. He didn't feel sadness. He didn't feel like something was being taken away from him. He felt relief that Matthew had someone to call Mom, relief that his son wasn't alone in that void that Ellen had left, relief that Connie's love had filled a space that he could never fill. Connie wept. She wept with sobs that came from the depths of her being. She wept for Matthew. She wept for Carl. She wept for all the years she believed she would never hear that word directed at her again. And she hugged Matthew as if her life depended on it. "I'm not going to let you be cold ever, my child. Never." That night, Robert called Connie to his study. He had made a decision. "Connie, I want to offer you something," he said. "But first, I need you to know that you can say no. There will be no consequences. You'll continue working here. You'll continue taking care of Matthew, and nothing will change." Connie looked at him with confused but attentive eyes. Robert continued, "I want you to stop being the housekeeper in this house. I want to offer you the position of Matthew's official caregiver, with a commensurate salary, with benefits, with a formal contract." Connie opened her mouth to respond, but Robert raised his hand. "Before you say anything, I want you to know that this isn't charity. I'm not paying you for what you've already done. That's priceless. I'm paying you for what you're going to continue doing, for the care you give my son, for the love you give my son, for being the mother he needs and that I can never be." Connie remained silent for a long moment. She looked at the floor. She looked at her hands, the same hands that had knitted the star blanket, the same hands that had held Matthew in the hospital nights, the same hands that had done what no other hand could do. And then she looked at Robert. "Sir, I appreciate the offer, but I can't accept the raise." Robert frowned. "Why not?" "Because if I accept money for taking care of Matthew, then it stops being love," Connie said. "It becomes work, and I don't want it to be work. I want it to be what it's always been, a gift from my heart to his." Robert didn't know what to say. Connie continued, "What I do want, if you'll allow it, is to stop being called the housekeeper. I don't want any more uniform. I don't want any more schedules. I just want to be here for Matthew, for you if you need me, as part of this family." Robert felt his eyes fill with tears. "That's exactly what I wanted to offer you," he said, "but I didn't know how to say it without it sounding like charity." Connie smiled. "We're both bad with words, sir, but good with actions, and that's what matters." That night, Robert did something he had never done. He took out his knitting needles, the same needles that Connie had given him 2 weeks ago, hoping he would learn. The same needles he had kept in a drawer because he didn't have time. And he started to practice. The first square came out horrible, crooked, uneven, with holes where there shouldn't have been holes. But he didn't throw it away. He kept it in the pocket of his robe. The second square came out a little better, still crooked but recognizable. The third square came out almost perfect. He continued practicing every night, after Matthew was asleep, after checking emails. Instead of pouring himself whiskey and staring out the window like he used to, now he sat on the couch in his study and knitted. Connie found him one night, a week later. She came into the study to leave him some tea, and she saw him there, focused, with the needles in his hands and his tongue slightly out from the concentration. She didn't say anything. She just smiled, and she sat down next to him. She took his hand. She corrected the position of his fingers. She showed him how to make a more even stitch, and for an hour, father and potential mother, because that's what Robert was starting to feel towards Connie. A companion, a family, knitted together in silence. They didn't talk about Matthew. They didn't talk about Carl. They didn't talk about blankets or hospitals or diseases. They just knitted. And in that silence, Robert understood something that would change his life forever. Love doesn't need words. It doesn't need explanations. It doesn't need justifications. Love only needs presence, patience, willingness to be there, like Connie had been there for Matthew, like he was starting to be there for his son, like the three of them were starting to be something none of them expected, a family. 6 months have passed since then. Matthew is 10 years old now. He still has cystic fibrosis. He still needs treatments, medications, and doctor's appointments. The disease didn't disappear. Miracles don't work that way. But something did change. Matthew is never cold anymore. He sleeps every night under his blanket of stars. The same blanket that Connie knitted over a year ago. The same blanket that is now a little worn at the corners, a little faded from being washed. But that is still the most precious object in Matthew's life. Connie is no longer a housemaid. She lives in the guest room of the Miller mansion. She has her own bathroom, her own living room, her own space, but she spends most of her time in Matthew's room, or in the kitchen, or in the garden under the magnolia tree. She's still knitting, but she no longer knits alone. Robert learned, after hundreds of crooked squares, after dozens of nights of practice, he finally managed to knit something that wasn't embarrassing. A beanie. A blue beanie with yellow stars that he gave to Matthew on his birthday. Matthew cried when he saw it, not because it was the most expensive gift, not because it was the prettiest. He cried because his dad had made it with his own hands, like Connie did, like people who truly love do. Robert also cried. He cried because he finally understood what Connie had known from the beginning, that love is not shown with credit cards, that love is shown with time, with effort, with the willingness to do something difficult for someone you love. Each stitch of that beanie had been a small battle. Each row had been an hour stolen from sleep. Each yellow star had been a silent wish for his son to be happy. And Matthew knew it. He felt it. He embraced it. That crooked, imperfect beanie, made by a man who had never in his life held knitting needles, was worth more than all the gifts Robert had bought in 9 years. Because you can't buy what is knitted with love. The hospital in New York City now has an official program of knitted blankets for pulmonary patients. It's called the Carlitos Program. Connie named it that. Robert funded it. 100 nurses have learned to knit. 1,000 blankets have been distributed. 1,000 children have stopped shivering from cold in the hospital nights, and each blanket in the lower corner has 2 embroidered letters, C and M, Connie and Matthew, or Carlitos and Matthew, or Care and Miracle. It depends on who reads it. It depends on who needs the blanket. This story shouldn't exist. There shouldn't be a housemaid who spends her entire salary on wool for a millionaire's son. There shouldn't be a child who stops shivering thanks to a hand-knitted blanket. There shouldn't be a father who learns to love watching a stranger do what he couldn't. But it does exist, because the world, despite all the bad things, still has people like Connie, people who give without expecting, people who love without conditions, people who knit blankets in silence at 6 in the morning before starting to clean floors that are not theirs. And if you're listening to this, if you've made it this far, I want you to do something. Think of someone who does something for you without expecting anything in return. A father, a mother, a sibling, a friend, someone. And say thank you. Not tomorrow, not next week, today. Because people like Connie don't expect recognition, but they deserve it. And because maybe, just maybe, The day you say thank you will be the day they most needed to hear it. The last time I saw Matthew, it was in a photo that Robert posted on his social media. It wasn't a photo of his company. It wasn't a photo of his last business trip. It wasn't a photo of any professional achievement. It was a photo of 3 people sitting on a couch. Robert, Connie, Matthew, all 3 knitting. Robert with his beanie half finished. Connie with a new blanket in rainbow colors. Matthew with a small square that he was learning to make. And below the photo, a simple text. I didn't know how to knit. I didn't know how to love. I didn't know how to be a father. She taught me all 3 things. Thank you, Connie, for giving warmth to my son when I only knew how to give him money. The photo had thousands of comments, thousands of people sharing their own stories of housemaids, of caregivers, of invisible people who did extraordinary things. But there was one comment that stopped me. It was from Matthew, written from his dad's account, obviously because a 10-year-old doesn't have social media. It said the following: "My Connie mom made me a blanket of stars because I wanted to touch the sky. Now, every night when I cover myself with it, I feel like I'm touching the stars, and I'm never cold. Never again. He's never cold now." Those were the words of the title of this video. And now you know what they mean. They don't mean that the cystic fibrosis is cured. They don't mean that Matthew's no longer sick. They don't mean that everything is perfect. They mean that a 9-year-old boy stopped shivering at night thanks to a blanket knitted with love by a woman who lost her own son 15 years ago. They mean that love can do what money cannot. They mean that there are angels among us, and some wear housemaid uniforms. You have 2 options now. You can close this video and forget what you heard. Continue with your day. Do what you had to do. Or you can do something different. You can call that person who takes care of you without expecting anything. You can thank whoever has given you warmth when you were cold. You can be, even if just for a moment, like Connie. Because the world doesn't need more millionaires. The world needs more people who knit, stitch by stitch, hour by hour, day by day, with patience, with dedication, with love, like Connie, like we all should be. And if this story moved you, if you feel that something changed inside you, don't keep that feeling to yourself. Share it. Tell someone. Leave a comment telling your own story of someone who gave you warmth when you needed it. Because stories like this deserve to be told, and people like Connie deserve to be remembered. Thank you for listening until the end. And remember, never be cold. And never let anyone around you be cold either. That's all Connie wanted. And it's all we need to learn, because in the end, when everything is over, when we are no longer here, no one will remember how much money we had. No one will remember what car we drove. No one will remember the size of our house. What they will remember is how we made them feel. If we made them feel warm when they were cold, if we made them feel loved when they felt alone, we even knit them a blanket with our own hands. When the whole world was telling us there was no hope, Connie understood that, and now you understand it too. The question is, what are you going to do with that knowledge? Are you going to keep buying things to prove love, or are you going to start knitting? You don't need knitting needles, you don't need yarn. All you need is time, presence, a willingness to be there when someone needs you. That is knitting. That is loving. That is being human. And that's what Connie taught a millionaire who had everything, except the most important things. He had money, but he didn't have time. He had power, but he didn't have presence. He had a mansion, but he didn't have warmth. Until a housekeeper with bamboo knitting needles showed him that true warmth doesn't come from blankets. It comes from the heart. And Connie's heart was full of love for a son who was no longer there. Full of gratitude for a boy who gave her a second chance. Full of hope that every stitch she knit made the world a slightly better place. That's it. That's the story. A housekeeper, a blanket of stars, a boy who is never cold, and a father who finally learned to knit, stitch by stitch, hour by hour, day by day, with love, with patience, with hope, like Connie, like we all should be.